On behalf of the Delta Legacy communities, I'd like to welcome you tonight. We are here to talk about the tunnel. We're going to call it the tunnel. Some people call it other things. And first of all, I want to thank Delta Protection Commission and Eric Mink for the sound system, and to Anna Paveo, who's in the back taking pictures, for helping set up so much of this event. Delta Legacy Communities represents the 11 Delta Legacy communities from Freeport to Knightson. We have 4 board members with us tonight. They're sitting up here in front. They're going to get a chance to ask questions. And then we're going to open it up to the audience. The questions will be asked of Catherine Mallon, who is the Executive Director of the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority. I get that right? Normally we just call it DCA for short. There's lots of D's in this. We're DLC. She's DCA. He's DPC. So really, without much further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Catherine. And I hope what you come away with tonight is an understanding of what DCA is and what it isn't. And I'm going to let Catherine go ahead and start this off.
Thank you, Jim. Before I get started, I just, some of you may or may not know that there is an application out to join the DCA board committee, stakeholder committee. We're looking for diverse interests within the Delta that we work with to present information, solicit feedback, and bring that back to the design team and make sure that we are reflecting the comments of the Delta in everything we do. We are committed to make sure that there is nothing that turns up in the CER, the concept engineering report that feeds the CEQA process, that we haven't vetted publicly with people and that they haven't had a chance to see and opine. If you have any questions, we're committed to answering them all. We're committed to being a very transparent organization. So I encourage anyone who's interested in representing Delta interests to apply for that committee, and they will all be Brown Act public meetings, so even if you aren't selected for the committee, you are certainly will be able to attend all of the meetings. They will all be public and filmed and with agendas and posted just like any other Brown Act committee. So, thank you for the invitation to speak. I appreciate, Jim, that you reached out. I met you about 2 months ago when we started a conversation. I hope it's the first of many to come. I want to use the next about 10 minutes just to talk a little bit about the DCA, how we're approaching the work moving forward, and I will always seek your advice and recommendations on how we work together in the future productively on this project. As a brief introduction, I am a California professional engineer. I've spent most of my career designing and building infrastructure projects, and I did manage the capital program for water and wastewater for the city of New York. It was about $14 billion. So I am familiar with the unique nature of very large projects. What I tell people all the time is that there is a very big difference between $1 million, a $500 million, $10 billion project. They're very unique steps, and it's not necessarily a linear line. I was also heavily involved in the city's response to Hurricane Sandy, which was one of the worst disasters in the U.S. history. I ran the emergency housing recovery program for the city. We got about 20,000 homes back up with heat, power, water within about a 3-month period after that storm. So I am familiar with working with people in highly complex and stressful situations. I learned a lot from that experience, and I bring that to the way I approach this job. The DCA is a joint power authority. It was formed by the participating state water contractors with DWR. The DCA has been tasked by the Department of Water Resources with the design and engineering work to support the state's efforts to modernize Delta conveyance infrastructure. We have about 50 engineers and other staff in our office right now. We are supporting DWR in engineering work for the CEQA process and stakeholder engagement, which is largely around taking the engineering work that we're doing and creating presentations and animations and visualizations so that we can make it as clear as possible for all of you to understand what it is that we are doing. I take direction from a 4-member board, which is comprised of elected board members of representative participating state water contractors. The current chair of our board is Tony Estromera, who is also a board member of the Valley Water in Santa Clara, which is one of the few Northern California participants in the state water contractors, participation. As you're aware, the program is of enormous consequence in one way or another, and it'll affect the lives of nearly every citizen of California. To the state water contractors, this is an essential project to modernize the state water project, to ensure its resiliency, to ensure its reliability. Resiliency and reliability are at the very core of the responsibilities and stewardship of public water agencies. There are 27 million Californians that are served by this water supply, 750,000 acres of agriculture. And they must confront the realities of earthquake risks, sea level rise, climate change. So this project is a core component of their portfolio. Now for the Delta residents, there's a question of just what the impacts of this project will be to the region and to Delta as place. Impacts like water quality, flows, recreation, fisheries, traffic, air quality need to be fully understood to help you all engage more effectively in the process. I understand that, and the DCA is committed to an open and transparent dialogue to see where we might be able to use engineering and design to reduce impacts and find areas where we might achieve some mutual benefit as it relates to the physical structures and how they are built. I apologize for reading this, but I just want to make sure I cover all these points for you. Back in February, the Governor and Secretary Crowfoot asked the Delta Conveyance team to take a fresh look and forge a new path forward as the project shifted from 2 tunnels to a single tunnel. And that's what we've been thinking about over the past few months as we ramp up. I've been meeting with a lot of people in the Delta and listening to what they have to say. I've met Eric. We had a meeting a few months ago, Jim, as I said, and I recognize quite a few faces here in the audience. I've learned a lot, and I very quickly and repeatedly learned that stakeholders in the Delta don't trust the DCA. And obviously that's the first area where we need to focus on. Our goal on the engineering team is not to get anyone to agree with the project necessarily, but rather to make sure that you understand that you are part of a thoughtful and transparent process, and we want to solicit your input, and we want to find better solutions through open communications and open dialogue between the community and the DCA. We know that we have a lot of hard work on our hands to reduce the impacts of this project in the Delta. It does not escape me or anyone on our team that Delta is not a place that easily facilitates the trucks and the thousands of new workers every day. In fact, we had a session today down in Isleton, Delta Farm, is that?
Delta Diamond.
Delta Diamond Farm. It was a lovely afternoon, a beautiful area, and we all drove in and saw a lot of the challenges here in the Delta, and just got to experience a day down there. And we'll have many more days like that. Delta's place is very important to me and the team, and the best way to understand what that means is to spend time out there. So we're working hard on identifying the best ideas that we can comb the world to reduce footprints, being mindful on how and where we can construct elements of the project, and work with you all to find the best way to access those sites and minimize the impacts to all of you. We also are looking for ways to create win-wins. We want to think about the way that we can fit in with a longer-term vision of the Delta. I don't know what that is, but I'm hoping that you all can tell me what that is, because without your voice, we can't try to steer the design and construction in a way that looks towards what your needs are. We're looking for ways that we can support local businesses, create facilities with potentially dual purpose, relieve transportation bottlenecks, invest in regional worker training programs. The things that are important to you are important to us. This project is large. There's upwards of $10 billion in capital investment to build this project, and certainly I think that there's a way that we can create opportunity as well. The DCA board that I report to has been very supportive, and they've funded a healthy budget for us this upcoming year so that we can do the kind of engineering and analysis that it takes to find the best solutions to the kind of problems that we're going to face in this project. We also have healthy funding for community engagement, stakeholder engagement, creating the types of graphics materials and animations and renders to make sure that what we are doing is well understood by the community, so that there's no confusion, and it helps facilitate a dialogue. We're approaching the kickoff of a new process soon. I'll let Carrie speak to the schedule, and I don't pretend to understand what the outcome of this process is going to be, but I am looking forward to engaging with all of you on a healthy and respectful commitment to engagement with all of you that I know you care deeply about this area. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak. And I hope this is the first of many conversations in the Delta regarding this program.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give one of these mobile mics to my board of directors. They're going to ask, we're going to ask the directors if they have questions, and then we'll open it to the audience. I only want one request, and that is that we remain respectful of what's going on here, and I'm not asking you to keep an open mind, just be respectful. So I'm going to start over here with Dave Sterling, who represents Walnut Grove.
Thank you, Jim. Ms. Malone, thank you for coming out to the Delta to speak to the people of the Delta communities about Governor Newsom's proposed Delta Tunnel project. The voluminous EIS prepared for the proposed Twin Tunnels project covered the lengthy construction phase in detail, but generally downplayed the extent to which it would negatively affect the lives of the people of the Delta or of the numerous fish, avian, and other wildlife. It was biased toward constructing the tunnels, downplaying the real negative effects and offering poor, insufficient mitigation steps for the many damaging and even destructive impacts on the Delta. So I ask you, what will be the new and materially different approach that this administration will be taking relative to the destructive impact of the of the tunnel's construction, and what will it impose on the people and wildlife of the Delta? If the difference is primarily to spin this mammoth tunnel project as a win-win for all parties, you will feel our pushback real hard, like we did with the Twin Tunnels project. So that's my question. What's new and different about what's going to happen this time?
What's new and different? I can't speak to what's new and different. I wasn't here for the last 12 years. I do appreciate the voluminous nature of the previous document. I think, to me, what transparency means is that anything that we're doing that affects the life of somebody that lives there will be stated, and you won't read about it in a CER for the first time if you choose to engage, all right? The number of cars, trucks, the route options, the noise impacts, any of the issues around the construction of the project will be made transparent so that you can provide opinion and feedback, and we will take it all in. I think what I said is, it doesn't escape any of us that this is not a place that was designed to handle this kind of construction, and we understand that. And so there are going to be new roads that may need to be cut. We certainly don't want to clog up any traffic here. You know, you look at 160, I mean, certainly that's not a road that can handle a lot of truck traffic. So we want to work with you. We're going to be completely transparent with our truck counts, our car counts. We want to try to keep as much of that out of the Delta as we possibly can. And we've got ideas. We've got people, both from the US and actually Europe, that are working on our logistics team that are brainstorming ideas. I mean, I even want to go see Elon Musk to see if he's got any crazy, wicked ideas of how we can do that. All I can commit to is a transparent process where I'm going to tell you everything that our engineering reveals and make sure that your questions are answered in a way that's, you may not agree with the answer. I can't always promise that we can just make everything go away, obviously. But if we could set an aspirational goal that, you know, may or may not be achieved, I mean, I suppose all of you would wish that we could do this in a way that was invisible to you, right? So that's the way that we're approaching the things that we're doing. We're trying to figure out ways that we do piling that doesn't pound, or there are ways to do it, actually. Figuring out different transportation routes that minimize road construction. There's a lot of ideas out there, but we can't move it forward unless we can engage in a conversation, I guess. So you're going to have to trust me that this is the way that our team is going to operate. It's everything that we do is going to be at the DCA committee around these impacts, and we hope to have a dialogue about them. And I think that's the best that I can do.
And please study the transportation issues out here. We have all types of transportation. We have people that come through the area who aren't even from here, and that is a real serious problem. We have first offenders that have to use these roads to get to some of the 70% of calls that they receive are for medical reasons. Same with the CHP and the sheriff. So please study that, because that is a real tough one.
I agree, and that's one of the comments that I heard when I was out talking to people, and it's why one of the ex officio members of our DCA committee is somebody who's in emergency response, so they can provide that input to the committee so that we can understand that better. I agree with you.
We can provide it too.
Excellent.
Dave,
I hope you apply for the committee.
Dave, pass it down to Dan, would you please?
Hey.
Hi, thanks for coming out. My name is Dan Whaley. Catherine, were you given a summary of our Monday meeting with Mr. Crowfoot?
I have not seen a summary of it. I've just heard bits and snippets of it. I heard that the topic was Nutria, I think, but there may have been other things that were discussed.
Actually, it was a very good and open discussion for several hours, and Mr. Crowfoot acknowledged that the no tunnel alternative is still an option. Were you aware of that?
I think Carrie will speak to that as part of the CEQA process. I'm just the engineer that does the alternatives analysis of alternatives that are identified, so.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. You agree that you have reviewed the old environmental impact report, the big thick one that Mr. Sterling referred to?
I personally have not. We have, between Carrie's team and our team, we have pieced through that document, yes.
So, but you agree that we're going to have all new facts, since that's 10 years old, that traffic has changed, that climate analysis has changed, that seismic summaries have changed, correct?
I'm going to let Carrie speak to that.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. If after you review...
I do agree that the world has changed in the last 10 years.
Well, let me ask you this though, Catherine. If the foundational facts do not support a tunnel, are you prepared as a professional engineer to tell your board to pass?
So let me try to help a little bit. My name is Carrie Buckman, and I work for the Department of Water Resources. So I'm the environmental program manager, and it's my job to work on the environmental permitting process. And so a couple of backing up a little bit in terms of what will be in the document. The environmental document will absolutely include a no project alternative to be able to compare with and without the project. So that will be a part of the CEQA documentation and a part of the evaluation. What we're doing now, one of the things that we are doing is looking through the environmental document and identifying all of the places where updates are necessary. We'll be looking at a scoping session scoping will start at the end of the year with release of the notice of preparation. And if there are specific things, we would really appreciate that submitted in comments. Like we know this piece of information is really out of date and we think that it needs to be updated. That would be incredibly helpful and we'd really appreciate it. In terms of the decision process, neither Catherine nor I are the decision makers on this one. So what we're doing as part of the environmental process is really trying to lay out all of the information to assist the decision makers in deciding how to move forward.
So why are we starting on our engineering if we don't even know what our project is yet?
So the engineering process has a lot of elements. So what we're working on now is starting the CEQA process, and that will have multiple alternatives. So what Catherine is doing is sort of foundational material, and I can pass this back to you to help us.
So you were at our last board meeting. So what we're doing is collecting all of the historical geotechnical data so that we understand the soils in the delta. We're looking at all the transportation routes in the delta. We can't predict what alternatives are going to come out of the process, but what we want to do is have the information available to us so as the alternatives come in that we can evaluate them from an engineering perspective. That's what we're working on right now.
So, as most of you know, during the water fix and the BDCP, the environmental document that came out was a massive 40,000 pages plus. But it was a combined EIR, EIS, the EIS part of it being federal environmental part of it, because there was federal participation on the Bureau of Reclamation. My understanding, Carrie, now is that this is strictly a state project, and therefore there will be no project level federal participation.
So we're still early in the planning process, getting prepared to release a CEQA notification or notice of preparation at the end of the year. We are expecting that to be a document that is an EIR and will at least it will include all of the components of an EIS. We're still working with potential federal agencies to decide if there will be a lead agency on the NEPA side, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. So we're really in early phases. Right now, a lot of what we're doing is listening, trying to come to sessions like these and incorporating feedback as we go. So we don't have an answer to that question yet. We're really in the early phases, but we will soon.
Okay, and just to clarify, the no project alternative is required by law. It's not voluntary by the state saying, oh yeah, we're going to do that because we feel right about it. It's required by CEQA. So just to clarify that, I'm going to pass this out to the audience. And as a matter of fact,
Bob had a question.
The question just changed. Yeah, Catherine, given the new National Heritage Area designation and the incomplete management plan existed there, don't you have to wait for that before you move forward with any project?
I'm not familiar what the law is around waiting for that. We certainly want to solicit your input to our project.
Do you understand what I'm
I do. I know that as part of that law, you have to write a plan. I don't know, I mean,
It's incomplete, so I'm just wondering how you proceed.
do you know the answer to that? I know.
I'd have to look into it more and get back to you.
Yeah.
I'll give you my answer to this, Bob, which you've heard before.
and it's this, the National Heritage Area, which is the Delta, plus a lot more. I mean, it goes all the way down to Vallejo and all the way up to Sac International Airport. The DPC, Eric's organization, is going to prepare a management plan. However, the enabling legislation for that National Heritage Area carried a poison pill that was put in there by Congressman McCarthy, which basically says that that National Heritage Area cannot be used as a reason to stop the tunnel. Now, that does not mean that as Carrie proceeds with her environmental work, that they can ignore special purpose laws. Special purpose laws being the National Historic Preservation Act, for one, which would apply to the National Heritage Area. So it's a little gray area, honestly, but remember there has been, it was when it was enabled, there was a poison pill in there to make sure that the National Heritage Area could not be used to stop the tunnel.
The other question I have is, you mentioned you have 50 engineers currently working. What are they working on? Are they working on any alternative?
We can't hear you.
You said, you mentioned you had 50 engineers working. How many of those are working on alternatives to the truck?
So, like I said, we're trying to get ready for the alternatives analysis. So we have a lot of geotechnical engineers that are studying the existing information and getting ready for the boring program that's about to be launched next year. That's quite a huge effort. We have people who, we are building right now a model that integrates all of the construction activities so that we can, regardless of what alternative gets identified that we need to study, can easily produce truck traffic, car traffic, air emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, construction sequencing, those kinds of things. So what we're trying to do is do a lot of the foundational engineering so that when the alternatives that come out of the scoping process, maybe there's one, maybe there's more, that we have enough engineering to start quickly analyzing those so that we can be very efficient in our work. So no, I don't know what the alternative is yet, but I know how as an engineer to take a blank sheet of paper that is the delta and collect information that helps quickly assess the viability of the alternatives. We also have a number of alternatives that were in the previous process. So we know that Congressman Garamendi had an option. We know that there's an option along the I-5 corridor. We know there was the option that was selected. So we have an idea of the range of alternatives. I don't know that some silver bullet is going to come out that didn't come out of the last process. So we're not exactly working in a vacuum. We kind of know what the boundary conditions are. So that's what we're working on.
Go ahead and pass, go ahead. We're just going to pass it.
Russ Van Holdensells, I'm the representative from Clarksburg, and I had a couple of things. On August 27th, DWR gave a Delta conveyance update. And in that document, it was stated that they were going to identify solutions that respect the Delta's history and support its future, including footprint considerations, design concepts, measures to avoid and minimize construction effects, and opportunities for economic and social benefits. The BDCP and the California Water Fix, from my perspective, had two major areas of impact on the Delta. The first involved all the construction impacts, 10 years, with a lot of major construction impacts. The second area of impacts is water. Water quality, water flows, all of those things that would occur from wherever your conveyance facility starts, all the way through to Tracy. Because it will change those flows, it will change that water quality. And in these four items that DWR said that they were going to address, there's nothing there that deals with water. There needs to be an understanding that any measure that you consider ensures that there are no adverse impacts to Delta water users' quality or flow. Is there a reason that was omitted?
Yeah, I'm on the engineering side, so I'm glad our issues were covered in there.
I'm asking you both.
No, we will definitely look at water quality and water supply impacts in the CEQA documentation.
Well, that's the second one. Now, you understand that there are some legal restrictions or legal constraints to what you're proposing or will propose. And they're laid out, some of them in the Delta Reform Act 2009.
Yes.
The political goals shall be achieved in a manner that enhances and protects the cultural and, well, Delta agriculture, et cetera. So it doesn't say in that act that it's okay to minimize it. It says that you shall. And so as you develop this project, I suggest you keep those things in mind. The other thing that the last projects did was whenever there was a question that was very difficult to answer or didn't quite align with the way that the project proponents would have liked the results to look, you relied on adaptive management. Adaptive management cured all ills in the last document. Please do not do that to us again.
I've attended a couple of these meetings and missed most of them, but I'm concerned that usually I'm a contractor, and if I have a job I want to propose to a client, I make a nice elaborate drawing so he can see what it is we're proposing. Those drawings have to be fairly explicit. And it just seems like every time I come or hear about it, there's nothing on a piece of paper that would tell me where this thing's going to start, the path it's going to take, how it's going to take it. And tonight I heard a real scary scenario that you might be building new highways right down through farmland and Delta. This beautiful place that we've got here. Well, don't shake your head. You just said it yourself. That you said you were going to build new highways or new roads or whatever, okay? So maybe I mistakenly said highway. I wasn't talking about I-5, okay? But to me, that might be okay, but why, if it's okay, why are we not being handed out tonight a nice big piece of paper with names and phone numbers of all those people that are proposing this thing, and the path that the pipe is going to take, where it's going to enter into where you're going to take the water into the soil, the path it's going to go, how many cubic feet of soil is going to be transported out there. It's simple. It's, what is it, pi r squared times the length of the tube? It's going to be simple, you know, engineering. And so I just like to know why we have to even consider this. I mean, you're just going to destroy thousands of people's businesses. They're little farmlets, like I have a small farm, and I have river rights to that water. And I heard another word tonight that kind of frazzled me a little bit, and those two words were water contractors. Like I could give a rip what those water contractors want. It seems to me like there could be a comparison in costs of what it would take to desalinate the entire Pacific Ocean and pump it to wherever you want it. I mean, compare that to what this tunnel is going to take. But you don't tell us. You haven't told us one thing about any of the things that I mentioned today. There's going to be people dying on that road. There'll be other people that are afraid to get on the road. There will be the steady stream of cars that come from San Francisco and the Bay Area. People that live out here, they're not going to be able to get on the road. It's going to be horrendous. Now, I hope you can put my concerns on a piece of paper. I've got a dozen questions, 13 questions right here. I won't bore you with them because I'm sure you don't want to hear about it. But those couple things that I just mentioned to you, I wish you'd address them as we walked in the door tonight. That's when it should have happened. And that's all I got to say.
Is this better? So a couple of thoughts. I understand that at this phase in the project, it's frustrating to come and have us not have drawings and information on the details. But we're starting, and we don't want to wait too long to talk to people. It's sort of this push and pull. When do we come talk to people?
I can draw it out in 15 minutes.
But we just aren't there yet. So we're still working on it. We are going to proceed in that direction. And maybe Kathy can talk a little bit about it.
All I can say is, any drawing that you want, just give me the list. I'll leave you my card. We'll present any drawing that you would like to see.
Bring them to the next meeting.
We don't have alternatives yet. We're just starting the process.
You've got your mind set on a certain outcome. Give us that idea. Just that one. That would start us.
Benefit of more than a few people here, I'm sure. It would be good for you two that are up here in front of us to define what you're calling the project. There were two tunnels. We've heard about one tunnel. Is it the same alignment? Is this same outtake, the same inflow, the same flows, whatever the case may be, what is the project? I would like to hear that from you two as to what you define right now, as of today, what the project is, please.
So we're taking our guidance from the governor, who announced as part of the water resiliency portfolio that he wanted to pursue an investigation of a single tunnel conveyance system. That's the extent of what we know at this point. We're still trying to define what that means and what it looks like, but that will be further defined towards the end of the year as we come around to releasing a notice of preparation.
Same alignment?
We don't know. We're looking, we will consider alternates. We're not sure yet.
All right, so I'll make one more comment, and then I'll be quiet. The problem that you've got, you can talk about traffic, you can talk about roads, you can talk about piling driving, you can talk about anything you want to. Those are all, in my opinion, rabbit trails. The problem is you're taking water out of the wrong place out of the delta. When you take it out of the delta before it ever gets into the delta, you are causing further problems for the delta, and you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. We've said this over and over and over again, and nobody listens from the other side of the coin, if you will. So it has to be a through delta conveyance to make it work properly for the delta, which has value in many, many different ways, whether that's environmentally, recreationally, or agriculturally. It has great value. If you're going to take more water out of the system before it ever gets to the delta, you're pulling it all up, and you're creating a bigger problem. There's water available. I'm not one of those who say you cannot take any water out of the delta at all. There isn't water available when we have high flows. So take the water after it's gone through the delta and convey it wherever you think you need to convey it. But let the delta live. And the only way it lives is keeping the water in the delta. So that's the basic wrong thing about what you're talking about at the moment. And you give a rip less about traffic and roads and all that other stuff. You're taking it out of the wrong place. Thank you.
I have a question on the DCA Stakeholder Engagement Committee that's going to be
Thank you.
that's going to be happening here. Who actually is in charge of that process? You had Janet Barbieri making the PowerPoint presentation at the DCA meeting the other day about that. But who is actually in charge of that process? I know there will be a board member who will chair the process, but who staff-wise is in charge of that process?
So the DCA board member will chair that organization, and there will be a DCA vice chair. And the DCA will work with DWR's team, Janet's team, to work with you to understand what you want to see on the agendas and to pull the material together for presentation, comment, feedback. So
Okay.
it'll be a very collaborative process.
Okay, so you are not in charge of that process.
I would say I'm
Not
responsible.
directly, maybe you're the big umbrella person in
No,
charge.
yeah, I don't have an umbrella, but I would say I'm responsible for pulling together the technical engineering information, so like logistics and things like that, pulling that technical engineering information together and putting the presentation together in a way that it is easily understood, and making sure that my team is delivering that material in the committee meeting and recording feedback and taking that back to the engineering team and creating this churn process.
Okay, well, you just made a comment that you were talking about this group deciding what it wanted on the agenda and so forth. I guess you're talking about the stakeholder advisors that they want on the agenda. Seems like the process would already know, already know what it's looking for. And it says that there's going to be in this PowerPoint here, it says that materials are going to be distributed before these work group meetings.
Correct.
And so, I mean, it would sound to me like this this is already decided what these work groups are going to be doing and what questions are going to be asked. Am I off base there or what?
Well, I think if we sat in a room, we could pretty easily come up with a list of things that everybody would like to know.
That's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, is there a process already designed and is this
Yes.
ready to go?
Yeah.
Or is this going to be a free-form deal?
It can't be, it's not a free form because you can't produce engineering information in a thoughtful way in a free form. So what we've done is we've come up with a list of topics that we think need to be discussed in a public forum so that we can get going on getting into.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to get to.
So it was actually in the packet that you're
Well,
referencing.
and I've got it right here,
Yeah.
and it's very thin, let's say that, on the
No,
kinds
if
of.
you go to the engineering presentation that was done that talked about,
Was it done as part of this?
yeah, I think it's in there.
I don't-
I'll find
I
the
don't
page
think
for
so.
you. You
But-
have the packet with
But
you?
my reason,
Yeah.
yes, and the reason I'm asking, and it's my comment at the meeting the other day, is that if this process is figured out and somebody's in charge of it, then the materials and what's going to happen in that process should be distributed ahead of time so people
Absolutely.
can see that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's see, what's the application date? It's getting pretty close to closing time for that application date, isn't it?
I think it's October 10th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Well, when's all this stuff gonna come out so everybody's informed about it?
October 4th? Oh, I'm sorry, October 4th is the deadline.
Oh, October 4th. Well, I mean, we're getting fairly close to October 4th, and I haven't seen that. I kind of pay attention to what's going on. I haven't seen any of that yet. And so, you know, if
Is it,
you're-
what you're asking is what are the topics that are going to be covered in
what are the
that
topics? There's-
next 3 years of meetings with this committee?
Well, at least for the next year.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you have it for the 3 years, then yes, let's see what that work plan or you know, so we can figure out for people that want to participate and the broader bunch of people that are in the Delta can see what the questions are going to be so they can think about it. And it talks about soliciting input from the greater Delta community to these representatives. So it would really be good before this thing kicks off and applications are due and by October 4th to see what that stuff is.
Yep.
And it's getting kind of late. And how do you plan to actually get the idea out to everybody that there's an application process? Because, like I said, I think I pay attention, and you know, you have to be really paying attention to catch that this process is happening.
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak to all of the outreach that Janet's group has done to solicit interest in the Delta. I understand that she did an e-blast. There's been postings on the DWR site. There's postings on our DCA site. We announced it at our board meeting, obviously. The list of topics that we will be presenting is actually in the engineering plan document that was presented at that board meeting, and I can help you find that in the presentation. If you're suggesting that we make it more clear that the types of topics that we're going to be covering, that's a takeaway, and we'll address that. That's fair enough. We can do
What
that.
about the next time we have a meeting to bring a plan we can look at?
We'll bring a plan when we have alternatives in the process. That's when we can bring plans. I mean, I think as Carrie explained, there is not a project yet.
So, go ahead. Can you stand up? Oh, Janet, hang on a second. Can you stand up and,
What is the application that's happening in about 9 days from now? What are you applying for? What's on that?
Janet, do you want to talk to this a little bit since you're leading this? I don't want to provide any kind of misinformation here.
Sure.
And I want to make sure that you guys are all well informed.
So my name's Janet Barbieri. I work on communications and outreach. And
And the question was, what is this application that we're talking about? Catherine mentioned it at the beginning of her talk. And so last week at the DCA's board, they took up an agenda item which was whether or not to form a stakeholder engagement committee. And that board decided to go ahead and stand that up. And as a part of that, there was information posted on their website that is background information and also an application process for this stakeholder engagement committee to the DCA board. So just as background, this stakeholder engagement committee is specifically a committee to help the DCA fulfill their mission, which has been tasked to them by the Department of Water Resources to assist with the design and engineering aspects that will feed into the CEQA process. And so this committee is specifically charged with going through the design and engineering issues to find ways to either avoid or minimize those issues that are the most alarming to the community. So we've talked about some of them, things like traffic and barge issues and recreation. There's a whole host of issues that design and engineering specific, what Secretary Crowfoot is looking for from us is working with the community to find ways to avoid and minimize those impacts. So it's a very specific role that this committee will play in terms of having those conversations about ways to do that. That's separate and apart from the CEQA process. That would be its own process. So, I'm sorry, just one thing on that. So the application is on the DCA's website. We have sent numerous e-blasts out. We have about 6,000 people on that email list. If you're not on that right now, I would encourage you to go to the department's website under Delta Conveyance, or you can talk to me afterwards and I can get you signed up for that. But that's the best way to get information on this project, at least at this point in time. We have also sent it to numerous people that we've been talking to in the community. We have encouraged people to share the application and the information about it within their constituencies, and we're putting it out on social media. We're encouraging local media as well, so hopefully the information will get out. Melinda.
So my understanding is there will be 17 members on it. One will be the DCA member, and then the other 16 are will represent different categories, I guess, of stakeholders or interests. Can you tell us what those categories somebody would be applying for that would then serve on that?
So I don't have them all memorized on the top of my head, but there are numerous, maybe you guys can help me remember what they are, but there's recreation, there's environmental, but also there are ex officio seats as well, so there are some that are specific interest group types, and then there are others like the emergency services that we thought would be good to be ex officio because they're sort of representing, Delta-wide issues. But on that application, there's also at-large seats as well. So if we missed a category, for example, you're like, oh, I represent whatever it is, it's not on there, and I think that this particular type of organization should be represented somehow, then that would be an opportunity to put that in there and say, hey, you kind of left this out, and so we think you ought to include this.
Who makes the
But
decision?
stakeholders are limited to 16, that's it?
Correct.
Who makes the decision as to who those 16 are?
So it'll be the DCA board.
Who makes the final decision on if this project is done and which option it is? Who is that? Who's that person?
I'll let Carrie explain that.
So, you're good. My work's good. So we'll be preparing the environmental documentation as the basis for that decision, but that decision will be made by the Secretary of Resources and the Governor. Really, the Governor.
So I want to go back to the 16, right? So this is a very large area with multiple different interests, and you're limiting it to 16. And who gets to decide which 16 people get to be part of the stakeholder board?
So it will ultimately be the DCA board that makes that decision.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The DCA, who from the Delta is represented on the DCA board?
Well, so the DCA board is an organization it's the JPA of the state water contractors. And so those are those are the board members for the DCA. But the point of having the stakeholder engagement committee is to try to have, as broad a representation of different types of interest groups as possible.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine, though, that we can't have too many to make the group inefficient. So that person, so let's say I'm fishing interest. So that obligation of that particular person will be to communicate then within the fishing community and try to bring issues into that group.
So I just want to take you back.
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
Okay.
Right, so who on the board decides who the best fishing interest person is?
So it'll be a board decision. The staff will help take a look at those applications, and we're hoping that people apply.
But
And
there's no Delta person on the board.
there's no Delta person on the board, right? But that's a good point, which is if you have concerns about that, apply or encourage other people that you think would be good representatives for interests that you're concerned the most about. That encourage those people to apply.
So it's mostly Southern California water contractors that are on board, right?
On the DCA board is state water contractors, and they are.
Southern California.
Well, there's also the Santa Clara Valley Water District.
We're giving them our water just because, right?
Well, there's a long explanation for how the state water project works.
They shouldn't have any right to this water at all, none.
Let's get back on topic if you don't mind. Way in the back.
So the CEQA process, you're not going to start the CEQA process, you're going to have the stakeholder meeting first, correct?
So we're trying to start that stakeholder engagement committee now, before the CEQA process has started. We're anticipating that the CEQA process will start toward the end of the year with the publication of the notice of preparation. That will kick off that whole CEQA side of things in terms of public engagement on that, and that will include the scoping process. There will be public meetings for scoping.
You're going to still be during that time.
Correct. But so those two things will be on a parallel path. Which is really why we are trying to start the stakeholder engagement committee now with the DCA, because it obviously takes a lot of process time to figure, to get it stood up and get it going and figure out when the meetings are going to be, et cetera. So
just back to her point, is there any openings for anyone from the Delta to be on the stakeholder? I mean, what qualifications would you need?
Absolutely. I mean, the entire stakeholder engagement committee, the intent is for it to only be Delta people.
Okay. And then the DCA is just state water contract.
That Joint Powers Authority is comprised of the state water, some of the members of the state water contractors, correct. So and I apologize, it is confusing. So there is in fact, I have something to pass out. I think I should pass out. But the state water contractors who are participating in the project in some way, they're the ones that would have to fund it because it's beneficiary pay. They're the ones that form that Joint Powers Authority. They're the ones that are working on behalf of the Department of Water Resources on the engineering and design aspects. And so yes, that board, that Joint Powers Authority is comprised of those water agencies.
And that is a GPA, so it'll be open to the public?
It's a Brown Act body. Their meetings are public. Their agendas are posted, 72 to 3 to 4 days ahead of time. It's all recorded, minutes. Yeah.
Is that board already appointed?
It is.
And there's no way to get someone from the Delta on that board?
Well, that board is comprised of the public water agencies that will be responsible for paying for the project. That's how they form the JPA. So that JPA is
Okay, let me chime in here. Jan, hang on a second. Let me chime in here for just a second. The question should be, why did they form a JPA? And the answer to that, which I got directly from people involved in the project, is the state water contractors did not have any faith in the state of California, particularly DWR, to successfully build this project. And since Metropolitan Water District, Southern California, has committed billions of dollars to the project, they form this JPA, which are primarily Southern California water interests, as you pointed out, and Department of Water Resources. So that's really the question, is why did they do it? Because state water contractors didn't think they could get the project through. That's one. Secondly, I'm not endorsing this committee, the stakeholder committee, but what I want to point out is that, I mean, I've been involved in this fight for 13 years. We have always asked for more Delta stakeholder involvement, and we never got it. This is a, it's an olive branch in some ways, but it's legit, I think. You got to make that determination for yourself. But what I'm saying is that this is something that's never happened before. And since we have always been on the outside looking in, this is a chance to start, at least get in the door and be at the table. So, next question.
Can I just...
Wait. Yeah.
Can I just add something? Sure. Yeah. Am I still on? Okay. This handout that I brought with me, I wasn't sure if we would need it or not, but I think we do. This is on our website. It's just a very simplified graphic that shows the relationship of the different organizations to each other. So there's one box for the Department of Water Resources, there's another one for the DCA, and then it shows how the public water agencies fit into that and how the DCA Board of Directors fits in. So hopefully that's helpful. I didn't print the right direction. You might find it easier to look at it on the website, but anyway, that's what that is.
Okay, I don't want this to devolve any further than it has, but you've been waiting quite a while, please.
Yeah, so Carrie, I think my question is more for you to carry back. With a project of this scale, you need to begin with the end in mind, which is, it's really nice that from the governor's office it comes down saying, hey, let's go look and see if we need what the tunnel will do. I think the more important question that I think needs to be answered first and foremost for the engineering, for the committees to work with is how much water is an absolute minimum requirement you need to justify to justify doing it, and whether that comes from the DCA or whoever it is. What's the absolute most money that can be spent on it, and what's the most money in terms of cost per gallon that the water can be? There's probably some other key criteria in there, but I think it's owed by you to carry back and the engineering to know in looking at this, and they certainly can't evaluate whether you should or shouldn't do a tunnel, or whether you should or shouldn't look at desalinization, if you don't have a set of very clear, measurable goals. Because as we've said, you take all the water out of the Delta, we have a high year, that's great. In a low year, we could drain the Delta dry when they look at how much water as a minimum is required. And that's the information that before you even get a stakeholder or anything together, those need to be clearly defined objectives, which is fixing the water problem in California, not to go look at just a tunnel. So that's the piece I would like to challenge you guys to go back with and come into the next meeting that you get from above and say, hey, this is the objective of this. It's not to build a tunnel, it's an objective to get X amount of gallons coming through every day at a cost of this and a cost of this to build it.
The tunnels is not going to give one drop of water, not one drop of water, make one drop of water. They're just taking our...
There's a second part of that equation that you were just given as far as how much water and how much it will cost. And that's spelled out in the Delta Reform Act, where it says flows necessary for recovering the Delta ecosystem and restoring Delta fisheries under a reasonable range of hydrologic conditions, which will identify the remaining water available for export.
Yeah, because there's earlier...
So there are two parts of the equation, how much you like and how much is available. And you need to do them before you get too far down the road.
It seems crazy about 50 engineers working on a project, right, that is a what if, okay? Because what if the option does become desalinization? Sorry, I can't say it. Desalinization.
All right, there's back there. Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question while I have this here?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Apparently, you've already started your project because you sent out a notice to the San Joaquin Historical Society of doing soil studies in the Delta and all the way down. The only one that I know of that got it was the San Joaquin Historical Society. I'm president of the Sacramento River Delta Historical Society. We got nothing. And I don't know how many other, there's the Alton Historical Society. You know, there's a lot of stakeholders that this is not getting into, and yet you're already moving forward with projects here. So I'm just saying that you're talking about getting out there and getting people. You're not doing it, and you're already getting yourself into trouble. And again, the biggest factor that I'm looking at in this piece of paper is who's in charge of the hen house.
So the letter was regarding some soil explorations that we are considering. So DWR is considering the idea that soil investigations may be helpful in the alternatives development and analysis process. At this point, we are working on a smaller CEQA document for those soil investigations, and as part of that, we wanted to solicit information about historical information. I will check with you, if you don't mind coming and talking to me after the meeting. Let's check and see why the Sacramento Delta Historical Society.
We have our history.
So,
you know, you can look back in your other reports.
Okay, then we'll make sure, because we do want to solicit information about historical records. Right, so we're looking to solicit information about historical records as part of the assessment about if and how this should occur. So that will be part of the CEQA evaluation, and that's just on a narrow band of soil investigations that's under consideration. That's not part of the overall project, it's for input to go into the larger project that will start later this year.
Here, no, right here.
Glad you're here, and appreciate the commitment to transparency. It's nice to see engineers in this role doing this type of thing. When you were considering this position, did you ever do your own personal evaluation of this concept of a conveyance and look at this ecosystem out here and say, hey, does it make sense to be taking this water, and what will happen with further stagnation in the South Delta, because we're already seeing algae and stagnated water, and now we're going to put in a pipe to not even have the water that we have flowing through today flowing through. Did you do your own look before you took this to make sure you were able to get behind it and feel good about the project you're running?
I'm trying to think the timing. I think I accepted the job before the governor's announcement when it turned into single tunnel to start this process all over again. They had CEQA approval, actually, so the timing is a little bit different, so I can't really answer the question in the way that you asked, because it was a different job that I accepted. We are now starting the process all over again, but when I took the job, it was going to be under the original JPA that we were a design and construction authority, and we were moving forward with design and construction.
The concept of a conveyance is something.
The concept of a tunnel?
Or conveying the water.
I mean, I can't speak to all of the environmental work and all of the impacts that went before. That's not the DCA's role in this process. One of the reasons why I was selected, because New York City has a lot of tunnels, and I have a background in running a capital program with lots of tunnels in it. So I can't speak to the question. I wish I could, but it's just not.
So, I mean, a follow-up to that is,
sure.
It's impressive what you did in New York, but this is a whole ecosystem. It's the largest estuary on the side of North America. And have you any experience with dealing with that level and environmental asset of what it is, and have thought through them?
Have I ever done an estuary project at this scale? No, I have not. But again, the study of that is all part of the CEQA process and the environmental process, and what comes out of that process, I don't know what that will be. I can't predict what that will be. I mean, we're the engineering support to them in this environmental process. I do consider myself an environmentalist, so that helps.
There's somebody back in the way back. Did you have a question way back? In the back? In the back?
At the side over here, too.
Yeah, hang on a second. Go ahead.
I did want to ask, so there's a contract with Jacob Engineering that North Delta Cares did a PRA to DWR for. And there's a contract with Jacobs Engineering. It's a contract for the design and construction of this, and it's also the contract for preparing the environmental document. I believe it's been amended.
No, we do not have a contract at this point for preparing the environmental document. You haven't started yet.
Well, then there's I do understand that there was an amendment to the Jacobs contract, and we requested it from DWR, but we're told we'd have to request it directly from the DCA. And I'm wondering if you're willing to disclose that contract and the amendments that were made.
Certainly, it wasn't an amendment per se, it was the task order for the work for fiscal year 1920. And yes, that's a public document, and I would be glad to disclose.
Thank you.
Sure, you bet.
And there's another question regarding the drilling. So I looked at the court order of entry for the previous drilling, and it had plans. In fact, they were plans for the project formerly known as Waterfix. And I was wondering, I know that if you're doing geotechnical drilling, you're going to have plans for a facility where you're doing the drilling, and I'm wondering if you're willing to disclose those prior to the drilling.
So what we're looking at sort of a menu of potential sites to do soil investigations as part of the CEQA documentation. What we're looking at is trying to get a better understanding of the geotechnical conditions within the delta. So it's not, at this point, it's not based on specific sites, but it's more of a broad brush. And as we move further down the process, if we're not looking at some areas anymore, we may not pursue those soil investigations. But at the moment, I'm sort of viewing it as a broad list just to try to get us some understanding of some of the conditions out there, especially some of the deeper conditions.
Just a second, the deeper soil conditions were in the main tunnel alignment. That's where the boring was being done. And I'd like to see that, if you could disclose that prior to doing the drill.
So we do have, when the CEQA document comes out, the sites will be a part of that discussion.
Hang on. By the way, Supervisor Natoli, thanks for coming tonight.
I'd like a little clarification on the decision-making process. So once you've developed your alternatives, including the no-plan alternative, that would be presented by you to the board, I'm assuming, the DCA board? So
the DCA board will not make a decision on what project to implement. That decision rests with the state.
Do they make any recommendations on the program? So the DCA board is only the fiduciary responsibility for the program?
So I will say that we as an agency are looking for input from a broad cross-section of people. I mean, that's part of the reason we're here. That's part of the reason we value input so much. We view this as a collaborative effort where we are actively seeking input. So certainly the state isn't going to make that decision in a vacuum, but the DCA board does not have a role in that decision process.
So the stakeholder panel reports or conveys their concerns to the DCA board or the DWR?
So,
Sorry. So the stakeholder engagement committee that I was talking about before, they're specifically focused on design and engineering issues, trying to avoid or minimize certain impacts that can be dealt with through design and engineering. So that's that function for that committee right there. There will be another process through the CEQA process for scoping, and once the public review documents come out, there will be public meetings, workshops, that sort of thing, to get input on the overall program. So there's sort of a couple of different levels of stakeholder engagement. The DCA one is specifically focused on the design and engineering.
So,
does that help?
Yeah, so in the end, the head of the DWR makes a recommendation to the governor, and the governor makes an ultimately political decision on to whether or not he should implement this program. And the benefits would go to, from what he would justify, say 20 million Californians. And of course they would bear the monetary cost, but the cost to their land, property, and businesses would be benefits because they get all the water they need for their farms in Central Valley, whereas we would bear the brunt of the business and lifestyle costs and would then receive roughly zero benefit from the program. We would receive, at the best, level, and most of us here, I think, assume that it's not going to be exactly the same ever again after the program. Just to clarify, that's correct. At best, we would receive flatline
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone here is prepared to say otherwise, that, you know, the 27 million Californians that rely on that water are mostly Southern California, some in the Bay Area. So yeah, the state water project has a specific purpose that does what it does. And at the same time, the impacts from that project for managing that state water project and trying to, you know, improve that infrastructure are happening right here. So we're here acknowledging that, we're trying to acknowledge that, and that's part of what the point of having that stakeholder engagement committee was intended to do, was to try to, by acknowledging it and having conversations about it, find ways to do those things that somebody listed before, the 4 things in the August update, in, you know, trying to find ways to avoid or minimize those impacts through design and engineering, because there are ways to do that. And I know that, you know, lots of people probably hear us say things like win-wins or potential, you know, long-term benefits that might come out of the capital infusion of $10 billion and think, well, that's just lipstick. Like, I'm not interested in that. And that may be true. I don't, you know, that's for you guys to say. But we at least want to ask the question, provide a forum to have that conversation and see what comes out of it.
So when it comes down to it, even if we all in this entire community say we don't want the $10 billion of capital infusion, it doesn't really matter. To the governor, at least.
Well, I can't speak for him and you can't either, you know? I mean, yeah.
You're a politician with aspirations, so I think we all can, but thank you. I'll
So thank you for this gentleman right here bringing that comment, because I'm going to tell you this right now. This is the same exact dog and pony show we've been getting for the last 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, and all this crap on the tunnel. So I don't mean to be disrespectful to you, but I want to say to this audience and tell you, we, as a Delta group at all, come up, get our checkbooks out and write checks and get a viable alternative on the table. You're going to get this shoved down your throat. It's inevitable. You hear it all the time. This lady in the middle, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
Janet.
Okay, Jan. Just said, I mean, just for instance, 27 million people rely on this water. Well, it was 25, now it's 27. So here we go again and again and again with this thing being shoved down our throat, because there is no alternative. There's no viable alternative put on the table to combat this issue. And that is huge. You've got to understand that. You're going to get this no matter what. The last thing I read in the Sacramento meeting, we needed 200,000 single-family residents to meet the demand of housing in the greater Sacramento area. That's 500,000 people if you figure 2.5 people per person. Where's the water going to come from? And if we don't come up with a viable alternative, this is going to get rammed down our throat, just as they've been trying to do for the last 10, 13 years, Jim. And it really bothers me. One other comment, I just had a great revelation this evening. We're all concerned about climate change and sea level rise. It's going to screw us all up, right? Well, I thought you guys could be the heroes of the entire environmental issue if you just said, hey, we're going to desal because we're going to pump down the Pacific Ocean and combat sea level rise.
And I just want to clarify, I don't think any of us are attacking you personally, although it may feel like it.
We understand.
It's very frustrated with the process, and we don't think it's you personally doing this to us. And we apologize for that. We feel bad. Personally.
It's okay.
Everybody's doing really well. Right over here in this way with Ben. I don't know if you can hear me, but before I leave, I've heard enough. You know, this is just a bad plan to begin with. And we've had lots of meetings, and I've gone to lots of meetings. You know, the only meetings I get is rarely do I get meetings except for Barbara. You know, as far as this process is concerned, I thought it'd be different. I thought we'd hear more about the plan, because what I'm hearing now is more like an informed consent. Okay, this is gonna happen, we're gonna tell you how it's happened, we're going to invite your input. We've been doing that for years. You have enough information already, we're just redoing everything. And as we have a deadline apparently next week, you know, about this application thing, you know, this is ridiculous, you know, it's kind of like, okay, you guys have been informed, you guys were invited to meetings, and so I'm not blaming you guys because you're the engineering people. So you're not, I'm not here, I didn't expect you guys to be here like this. I thought we'd have, you know, more information. Rather, you're just kind of giving us some kind of an outline of what's going to happen. That's what I hear. I'm not a scientist, you know, and I was born in the morning, but not this one. Okay? So, you know, I'm just hearing a bunch of bullshit again. I'm sorry. So I'm going to leave. I'm just, you know, I've had enough.
Yeah, and then there was another, but we got about 10 minutes, and I'm going to try that.
I just have one quick question. Deidre was at a meeting with Metropolitan, and they're the big financiers. They're coming up with $10 billion or $100 billion if that's what this is going to cost. She confronted them about the sea level rise analysis, and Metropolitan was truthful in saying that, well, if that's really true, we're going to have to move the intakes 20 miles north. Now, maybe this was an offhanded comment, but is that going to go into the CEQA process? And if you lose your funding from Metropolitan, does this whole project go away? Or are we really going to try and find an answer, as Mr. Newhart said, to this idea of conveying water?
So I mentioned earlier that we haven't identified alternatives yet, so I can't tell you what the alternatives are. My understanding about that comment was that it was sort of a discussion and not a commitment that would be an alternative, but we do need to consider further the implications of sea level rise, and it's something that we will consider as part of the CEQA process. We just haven't gotten far enough down the road to fully have an answer. We can bring that back in the future.
I just wanted to talk about destruction, okay, on property. My brother and I, we have the Scribner Ranch down south of Freeport. Got a letter from the Department of Water Resources, and it says, this letter is a follow-up to the Department of Water Resources' commitment to compensate you for the rutting damages of your property which occurred during recent Delta conveyance drilling activities. So we are getting money back for a right-of-way agreement for damages, evidently, and we are getting money back in compensation because of road rutting damages that were done. Now, okay, that's one form of damage. What other damages are going to be happening with these tunnels? What holes are going to be made? What breaches in the Sacramento River are going to be done? What flooding is going to happen? I mean, if this is just a rutting damages on one of our properties down by the road, I'm really concerned about this. I really, really am. I want to know, what do you guys do if you really screw up? What happens?
Go back to New York.
Nothing personal, right?
That's not necessary. Go ahead, somebody, if someone wants to answer.
So that drilling was done under court order of the Delta water fix that went through about 6 or 7 years and finally the state Supreme Court. And that site was one of the sites that was in that. And it's the prior alignment, and that's what the question was before, is if the engineering and the borings are occurring, and they are occurring under the prior alignment, what are you learning? You're learning about the prior alignment, and are we really looking at other alternatives, or are we still looking at them?
What's it done?
I mean, you can't go around ruining our property. I mean, it's farm property. It has to be functional so that we can be productive on these ranches.
So I understand the need to consider damages, and that's definitely something that we want to consider the potential for any of that damage during the environmental process. There are procedures through the state for if unanticipated damages arise, and those would continue to be followed. But again, our goal is to try to reduce and eliminate to the extent possible, and if that isn't possible, to compensate in the way that you're mentioning in your letter, to try to address any potential impacts such as road rutting.
Except the longer you delay in giving us a succinct plan, right, you damage our property. You damage our property values, right? Who wants to buy a house in the Delta when they don't know if the tunnel's going to come through their backyard? And this has been going on for more years than I'm aware.
So here,
You've already damaged, I'm sorry.
No,
You've already
please go ahead.
damaged our value.
no, go ahead, I'm sorry. Look, I'm gonna take one more question, right here.
I keep hearing that when the CEQA process happens, then we'll get into the alternatives, and we'll kind of look in and see if there are alternatives. There's 40,000 pages of documents, and many, many, many hearings where the alternatives have been discussed over and over again. There's a supervisor from San Joaquin that's got a specific list of, I think it was 200 different groundwater storage projects that could be done. There's still many more ways to preserve water in Southern California, ways to stop wasting it, ways to capture more in areas where we have a lot of water. The alternatives have been vetted, and largely it seems ignored, and we're getting that from you that, well, someday we'll look at those alternatives, or we'll figure out what they are. Please, don't disrespect us that much to give us that spin. And I just wanted to reiterate that what has come up, that this, what you're calling the stakeholder committee, and that will be probably politically represented as the Delta voice, is being cherry-picked by the Southern California water contractors. So the deck is already stacked.
So with regard to the stakeholder engagement committee, I encourage you to apply. I'm hoping as we get as many people from the Delta to apply as possible. And we are going to do our level best to make sure that the representation for all those different types of interest groups is an honest one, a good one. But we can't do that if we don't get applications, we don't get people to apply and to participate. So that's...
You said that the board is going to make this election, not you.
Right.
The board is the Southern California Water Authority.
But the members will be you all. I mean, it'll come from the people who apply. So I'm just encouraging you to apply to make sure that the pool of applicants is as broad and as representative as you all would like it to be.
But we're not hearing about this until today. These people are so disrespected that they get 5 days notice for an application to be on the committee. That is that important. I do outreach to this community. I know how to reach them. I know how to communicate with them. And once again, DWR is saying, oh, well, we tried. How many people received an email or any notification besides from the group about this application process or about what was happening in this from DCA or from DWR?
If you...
Three people.
Go to the post office in each town and post it there.
We can do that. If you want to talk afterwards, if you have ideas about how we can improve that outreach, I would be happy to take any recommendations that you have.
Extend the deadline. And extend the deadline for these people, because apparently no one in the Delta knew that they had the opportunity to be a stakeholder on something that is this important, but yet they're given the discourteous measure of giving them 5 days. You need to extend the deadline and give these folks an opportunity to log onto your website and figure out how to do this application. And the application needs paper copies, need to be in every single post office in this Delta. They need to be available to these people. You are directly affecting them with this project, and they have the right to be participants. We don't want to be locked out of here.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Jim, let me just ask one question that screams to be asked. If an applicant to the stakeholder committee indicates that they're opposed to the tunnel, what's the likelihood of them being selected?
Okay, so listen, I'm going to wrap this up. We said it ended at 8 o'clock. So when we started this, my hope was that you all would get a better understanding of what DCA does. The table got flipped. They're getting a much better understanding of how we feel, I think, than they had anticipated maybe. So I want to thank everybody. And look, one of the things that I really want to encourage, and the Delta Legacy Communities Board will do this, is we'll hold as many meetings as you want to talk about the process that we're into, because it's a process right now. There's a lot of talk about CEQA, how that process works. There's a lot of talk about the design, mitigation, and these stakeholder engagement committee. We can help facilitate meetings. We can talk to you individually. We would like you all to participate in the Delta Legacy communities. We're about the only ones who represent everybody, or try to, from Freeport to Knightson, which reminds me, I hope everybody knows where Knightson is. Yeah. So what I'm
Has the San Francisco Bay Estuary all been getting involved with this process too? That we get them involved?
You know what? They have Friends of the River. There's the folks in the Bay Area. There are dozens of groups who have opposed this project, have been involved in BDCP and water fix for years, out of the Bay Area, up in Northern California, and the Delta. So, who knows? This is just the groundswell. This is just starting. So now you all have at least a fundamental understanding of what's going on, or maybe you don't because it's confusing, but we now have a place you can talk, and a place you will listen. Delta Legacy Communities Board, I'm the chair, we got vice chair, we got Dan Whaley's up in Hood, Doug Hamley, who's still here, and from Rye. I mean, we try to cover the Delta. And we want to hear from you, because we can be the voice, or at least one of them. So I want to thank everyone for coming. I hope you at least got a better understanding of what's going on here. And we'll look forward to the next time. And I will invite, if you all are up for it, we'll schedule another meeting. And then we'll put up the bulletproof glass for Tim.